The night I first set foot on the forsaken grounds of the ancient convent is a memory that still sends shivers down my spine. It was a night that would change the course of my life. A night when I willingly walked into the heart of darkness. The moon hung low in the star-studded sky, its cold light casting long, eerie shadows that danced among the overgrown trees surrounding the convent. The air was chilled, and a thin mist clung to the ground, as if the very earth itself feared to tread upon this unholy place. For years, the tales of the haunted convent had beckoned me, pulling at the edges of my curiosity like a moth drawn to a flickering flame. Whispers of ghostly apparitions, unexplained phenomena, and a curse that had plagued the place for centuries had reached my ears, and I could no longer resist the call of the unknown. As I stood before the imposing iron gates that guarded the entrance, they groaned and creaked in protest, as though the very entrance to the convent itself wished to deter intruders. But I was undeterred. My heart, filled with both fear and excitement, pounded in my chest as I pushed the gates open, their rusty hinges protesting my intrusion. I had come here seeking answers, seeking the truth that had eluded so many before me. The mysteries that awaited me inside were darker and more malevolent than anything I could have ever imagined. And so, with a deep breath and a sense of foreboding that clung to me like a second skin, I stepped into the haunted convent, ready to uncover the secrets that lay within. Inside the convent, the air was heavy with the scent of decay, a musty mixture of old wood, forgotten incense, and the lingering echoes of time's passage. Dust particles swirled in the dim light, casting eerie shadows on the cracked walls. The silence was deafening, broken only by the faint sound of my own footsteps echoing through the empty corridors. The walls themselves seemed to hold secrets, whispering in the language of forgotten memories. Faded frescoes of saints and angels adorned the peeling wallpaper, their once vibrant colors now muted and mournful. As I passed each painting, it felt as though the eyes of the holy figures followed me, their gazes filled with sorrow and reproach. As I continued to explore, guided only by the dim light of my flashlight, every step I took seemed to disturb the silence, sending echoes reverberating through the ancient halls. It was a silence that held a weight, as though the very walls were burdened by the tragedies that had unfolded within them. But there was one figure, whose presence loomed large in the shadows, the mysterious priest who had arrived at the convent with a purpose known only to him. His name was Father Ignatius, one of the most famous and revered priests of his time. Father Ignatius's reputation as a defender of the faith and a vanquisher of malevolent forces preceded him. He had been called to the haunted convent by whispers of a curse that had plagued the place for centuries, a curse born of betrayal and bloodshed. His background was shrouded in mystery, and some said he possessed abilities beyond the ordinary, a deep connection to the spiritual world that made him a formidable adversary to the malevolent forces that had tormented the convent for so long. Father Ignatius believed that it was his divine calling to confront the curse head-on and bring an end to the torment that had plagued the nuns in the haunted halls for generations. He had dedicated his life to this singular mission, driven by a conviction that only the power of faith and righteousness could banish the darkness that had taken hold. As I, Father Michael, learned more about Father Ignatius and his mission, it became clear that his presence in the haunted convent was a last, desperate attempt to lift the curse and offer redemption to the souls who had suffered for so long. But whether he would succeed in his perilous endeavor, or fall victim to the malevolent forces that lurked within the haunted halls, remained a question that only time would answer. In a forgotten chamber, hidden behind a heavy wooden door that had nearly succumbed to the passage of time, I stumbled upon a treasure trove of secrets. It was a room that seemed to defy the rest of the convent's decay, its walls adorned with faded tapestries and ancient leather-bound tomes. In the corner of the room, beneath a tattered veil, lay an ornate wooden desk, and upon it rested a worn-out diary. Its pages were brittle and yellowed with age, its leather cover cracked and weathered. I gently lifted it, careful not to damage the fragile artifact. In the shadowy hallways I would hear voices, whispers faint and mournful. They were voices of anguish calling out from the depths of despair, their words incomprehensible yet laden with sorrow. It was as if the very walls themselves held the echoes of the nuns' torment. Objects within the convent took on a life of their own, defying the laws of the physical world. Books flew off shelves, Chairs toppled without provocation, and paintings twisted in their frames as if seeking escape from the oppressive atmosphere. It was as though the spirits of the wronged nuns were determined to make their presence known. In the darkness, I often felt a cold, ethereal presence brushing against my skin, raising goosebumps and sending shivers down my spine. It was a touch that left no physical mark but left an indelible scar on my soul. These unexplained phenomena were the spirits' desperate attempts to communicate, to share their pain and suffering with the living. The more I witnessed, the more I became convinced that the spirits of the convent were trying to guide me, to lead me deeper into the heart of the mystery, urging me to uncover the truth and set them free from their eternal torment. But as the malevolent forces grew stronger, I couldn't help but wonder if I was meddling in something beyond my comprehension, something that threatened not only my sanity, but my very existence. The convent's dark secret was unraveling before me, and I could no longer turn away, even as the shadows closed in around me. With each passing day, the palpable sense of malevolence that hung in the air grew stronger, saturating the very walls of the convent with a maleficent energy that seemed to feed on my fear. I began to notice that the shadows that danced along the walls at night took on grotesque forms, twisted, distorted shapes that seemed to mock my presence. They writhed and contorted in a macabre dance, their movements synchronized with my every step. It was as though the darkness itself had taken on a life of its own. The malevolent presence did not confine itself to the shadows alone. Cold drafts swept through the convent, chilling the air to bone-numbing temperatures. I would wake in the middle of the night to find frost forming on the windowsills, despite the warmth of my breath in the small chamber where I slept. I could feel their eyes upon me, spectral gazes that bore into my very soul. Though I could not see them, I knew that I was never truly alone within those forsaken walls. The spirits watched, waiting, and their silent condemnation was more haunting than any spoken words. The darkness seemed to feed on my fear, growing stronger with each moment I spent in the convent. It was as though it reveled in my vulnerability, taunting me with the knowledge that I was powerless in the face of forces beyond my understanding. As the malevolent presence continued to tighten its grip on the convent, I found myself plagued by nightmares, vivid, nightmarish visions that blurred the line between reality and delusion. In these dreams, I would wander the endless corridors of the convent, pursued by shadowy figures and tormented souls. I would wake drenched in sweat, my heart racing, and the feeling of dread lingering long after the dream had faded. Yet, despite the terror that surrounded me, I could not turn away. The convent held secrets that demanded to be revealed, and I was determined to confront the sinister presence that held it in its suffocating embrace. It was a battle of wills, a clash between the living and the dead, and I could only hope that my resolve would prove stronger than the malevolence that sought to consume me. For every answer I found in the haunted convent, more questions arose, shrouding the mysteries in an impenetrable fog of uncertainty. As I continued to document the unexplained phenomena and the sinister presence that plagued the convent, I couldn't help but wonder, who was the true murderer? What secrets did the corrupt priest hide? And why did the spirits of the nuns continue to haunt this place, even in death? The diary of Sister Agnes had hinted at a curse, born of betrayal and bloodshed, but the details remained elusive. I scoured the convent's archives, hoping to unearth records that would shed light on the events that had transpired within these walls. But the answers remained frustratingly out of reach. I found cryptic references to a priest, a man whose name had been struck from the annals of the convent's history. He was mentioned only in hushed whispers, a shadowy figure with a sinister reputation. What had driven him to commit such heinous acts? And why had he escaped justice? The spirits themselves offered no clear answers. Their whispers were filled with anguish, their apparitions hauntingly silent. It was as though they were bound by an oath of secrecy, unable or unwilling to reveal the full extent of the horrors they had endured. As I continued to investigate, the darkness seemed to close in around me, its secrets tantalizingly close yet maddeningly elusive. I was caught in a web of unanswered questions, each one a knot in the intricate tapestry of the convent's history. It was a maddening paradox. The more I uncovered, the deeper the mystery became, leaving me with a sense of unease and a hunger for the truth that bordered on obsession. The convent held its secrets close, and I knew that I was on the precipice of a revelation that could shatter everything I thought I knew about the world. But as I descended further into the abyss of uncertainty, I couldn't help but wonder if some questions were meant to remain unanswered, if the darkness that clung to the convent's walls would forever defy explanation. And so, I pressed on, driven by a relentless curiosity and a determination to confront the final chapter of the haunted convent's dark history, armed with the knowledge I had painstakingly gathered and the burning desire to bring an end to the malevolent forces that had held the convent in their sinister grasp for centuries. I steeled myself for the ultimate confrontation. The convent itself seemed to respond to my presence. The atmosphere grew charged with a sense of impending reckoning, and the spirits that had tormented me with their whispers and apparitions grew restless, their presence intensifying as I drew closer to the heart of the mystery. In the darkest hour of night, when the boundary between the living and the dead is at its thinnest, I made my way to the chapel, a place where the supernatural forces within the convent seemed to converge. There, beneath the dim, flickering candlelight, I began to recite the incantations and rituals I had discovered in my research. The spirits stirred, their ethereal forms coalescing around me, their voices a cacophonous chorus of despair. It was a battle of wills, a clash between the living and the dead, and I could feel their anger and desperation pressing in on me from all sides. But I stood firm, determined to bring justice to Sister Agnes and free the trapped souls of the wronged nuns. The malevolent presence that had held the convent in its grip for so long would not prevail, not while I had the strength to confront it head-on. As I invoked the ancient rites and spoke the words of power, the very walls of the chapel seemed to tremble. The spectral forms twisted and contorted, their anger unleashed upon me, their wrath manifesting in terrifying displays of otherworldly power. It was a harrowing battle, a test of my courage and resolve. The darkness fought back with a ferocity I had never imagined, but I could not falter. I had come too far, uncovered too much to turn back now. The chapel became a battleground of the supernatural, a place where the forces of light and darkness clashed in a cataclysmic struggle. The spirits raged against their captivity, their ethereal forms twisting and writhing as they sought to break free. In that moment, I knew that I was not only confronting the malevolent forces that had haunted the convent for centuries, but also confronting the very essence of evil itself. It was a battle that would test the limits of my courage and determination, a battle that would determine the fate of not only the haunted convent, but also my own soul. But I was resolved to see it through to the end, to bring justice to those who had suffered and to break the curse that had bound them for far too long. The final confrontation had begun, and I could only hope that my determination and willpower would prove stronger than the darkness that sought to consume us all. As the supernatural battle raged on within the chapel, the malevolent forces grew more desperate and their manifestations more horrific. The very air seemed to crackle with tension, and the shadows that danced along the walls twisted into grotesque forms, their movements a grotesque mockery of life. I pressed forward, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest, every fiber of my being focused on the singular goal of breaking the curse that held the convent in its grip. The incantations and rituals I had painstakingly collected echoed through the chapel, their power, a beacon of hope in the sea of darkness. The spirits fought back with a ferocity that defied reason. Their ethereal forms contorted and writhed, their screams a chorus of anguish that threatened to overwhelm me. But I could not yield. I would not yield. As I continued to recite the ancient incantations, a blinding light erupted from the consecrated altar, bathing the chapel in a radiance so intense, it felt like a physical force. It was a light born of purity and righteousness, a light that sought to banish the darkness that had plagued the convent for centuries. The very walls of the chapel shook, and the malevolent presence screamed in agony as it was pushed back, forced to retreat. It was a horrific spectacle, a battle of good versus evil that played out in a place where the boundaries between the living and the dead blurred. In the aftermath of the cataclysmic burst of energy that shattered the curse, the chapel was indeed bathed in an eerie calm. The spirits of the wronged nuns had dissipated into the ether, their mournful wails fading into a ghostly silence. It seemed as though the malevolent presence that had plagued the convent for centuries had finally been vanquished. I stood there catching my breath, my heart still racing from the intense confrontation. A sense of triumph washed over me as I realized that I had succeeded in breaking the curse, freeing the trapped souls, and ending the horrors that had haunted the convent. But just as I began to feel a glimmer of relief, a sudden chill gripped the chapel, and the very air seemed to thicken with an oppressive darkness. It was as if the malevolent forces were regrouping, coalescing into a single powerful entity. And then, from the shadows of the chapel, emerged a spectral figure, a nun, cloaked in a tattered habit, her eyes burning with an unnatural malevolent fire. She radiated an aura of power that dwarfed anything I had encountered before. The other spirits cowered before her, their ethereal forms trembling in her presence. It was clear that this nun was the source of the curse's strength, a force of darkness that had remained hidden until now. With a voice that sent shivers down my spine, she spoke, her words laced with venom and despair. "You thought you could banish us so easily, but you underestimate the power of our suffering. I am the one who will never be free, and I will make sure you share in our torment." In an instant, the chapel erupted into chaos. The malevolent nun unleashed a torrent of supernatural energy, tearing through the very fabric of reality. The walls cracked, the candles extinguished, and the eerie calm was replaced by a maelstrom of horror. I was powerless before her, and as she advanced, her eyes locked onto mine with a malevolent glee. It became clear that she sought to claim me, to make me a part of the cursed convent for all eternity. With every step she took, the chapel warped and distorted, its dimensions shifting like a nightmare. The very ground beneath me gave way, and I was plunged into an abyss of darkness, the malevolent nun's laughter echoing in my ears as I descended into an unknown and horrifying fate. And so, as I fell into the abyss, the eerie calm that had briefly settled over the chapel shattered, replaced by the realization that the battle was far from over. The malevolent presence had a new terrifying face, and the curse that had plagued the convent for centuries still held its sinister grip, leaving me with a sense of dread and despair that defied comprehension. As I descended into the abyss, the malevolent nun's laughter echoed in my ears, and darkness enveloped me, swallowing me whole. For days, or perhaps it was mere moments, time lost all meaning. I was trapped in a nightmarish void, tormented by visions of the haunted convent and the malevolent nun's sinister presence. When I finally emerged from that harrowing ordeal, it was with a gasp, as though I had been pulled back from the brink of oblivion. I found myself lying on the cold, damp floor of the chapel, my body battered and my mind fractured by the horrors I had witnessed. But something had changed. The malevolent nun was nowhere to be seen, and the chapel, though still in ruins, no longer exuded the same suffocating malevolence. It was as if her power had been broken, her reign of terror ended. I struggled to my feet, my skin now bearing an eerie pallor, as though the very essence of the curse had seeped into my being. My once fair complexion had turned a sickly shade of gray, a haunting reminder of the malevolent nun's maleficent influence. As I staggered out of the chapel, I realized that I had survived the confrontation, but not without paying a terrible price. I was cursed, haunted, forever marked by the malevolent forces that had once held the convent in their thrall. The world outside the haunted convent had changed as well. The once vibrant colors of nature had dulled, and a sense of foreboding clung to the air. It was as though the curse had not been fully vanquished but had instead spread, infecting the world beyond the convent's walls. In the wake of the harrowing events at the haunted convent, I found myself forever changed, both physically and mentally. The curse that had once haunted the sacred grounds now clung to me like a shadow, a constant reminder of the malevolent forces I had confronted and the price I had paid for victory. My skin remained pallid, a stark contrast to the world around me, as though I were a living relic of the darkness that had once held the convent in its grip. I had survived the malevolent nun's onslaught, but the curse had left its mark, a physical manifestation of the horrors I had endured. The world beyond the convent's walls had not escaped the curse's influence either. Nature itself seemed tainted, as if the malevolent forces had spilled out into the world, spreading their corruption far and wide. The very air felt heavy with the weight of an unresolved darkness. Though the malevolent nun had been defeated, Her legacy endured in the form of unanswered questions and lingering shadows. The mysteries of the haunted convent remained shrouded in uncertainty, and the true nature of the malevolent forces that had plagued it might never be fully understood. As I walked away from the haunted convent, the memories of that fateful confrontation lingered, a constant presence in my thoughts and dreams. The whispers of the past continued to echo through the halls of my mind, a reminder of the horrors that had once plagued those sacred grounds. I couldn't help but wonder if the malevolent forces had simply bided their time, waiting for the opportunity to return. The battle may have been won, but the war against darkness was far from over. The curse, it seemed, was a relentless foe, and its true extent remained a haunting mystery. And so, as I carried the weight of the haunted convent's legacy with me, I knew that I could never truly escape the shadows that had once enveloped my life. The malevolent presence may have been banished, but its legacy lived on, a reminder that some horrors could never be fully erased, and some mysteries could never be fully unraveled. In the shadows of the night, if our tales from unsettling horror stories gave you a fright, press like and let it be known. Subscribe, so you're never alone in this haunting journey, and share, so others too can be wary. Until our next sinister tale, stay dark, dear listener.